You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Brooke Warner.
Thanks for tuning into Author Stories today. We've got a fantastic show coming up for you. But before we jump into that, let me tell you about a couple of sponsors today. RJ Pinero and his brand new book, Chilling Effect, a global climate thriller. A ruthless eco-terrorist, a woman determined to stop him. Chilling Effect, RJ Pinero's newest thriller, explores a world in the not-too-distant future where terrorism is taken to a new level, one with world-ending consequences. You never know what you're capable of until the monster inside of you pushes you beyond your moral line in the sand. These are the opening thoughts of former climatologist William Christed as he prepares to attack our delicate ecosystem. He's hell-bent on avenging his father's death and will go to extremes of terrorism never before seen, all to strike a blow to those whose hubris led to his father's demise. He will take full advantage of the greed and narcissism ever present in the world, as well as the fragility of our planet to ecological terrorism, and use it to plot a scenario so grim, yet so compellingly real it could have ripped from today's headlines. Check out the brand new thriller Chilling Effect from R.J. Pinero. Michael Anderle has a brand new series that's launching. It's called Opus X, and the first book is Obsidian Detective. Two rebels whose worlds collide on a planetary level. On the fringes of human space, a murder will light a fuse and send two different people colliding together. She lives on Earth, where peace among the population is a given. He is on the fringe of society, where authority is how much power you wield. She's from the powerful, the elite, he's with the military. Both want the truth, but is revealing the truth good for society? Check out Obsidian Detective, the very first book that's up for pre-order now, from the new series Opus X by Michael Anderle. If you love comics the way I do, go check out Cool Comics in My Collection at edgosney.com. Ed runs one of the best comics blogs on the internet. New episodes each Thursday come out, digging into the things that we have loved about comics and comic collecting. There's something there for everyone. Go check out Cool Comics in My Collection at edgosney.com. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Brooke Warner on the show with me today. She has a fantastic new book. It's called Right On, Sisters, Voice, Courage, and Claiming Your Place at the Table. Brooke, I love the book, and there's a little secret that I have to tell you. I know this book is intended for women, but I got a lot out of this book. So thank you for that. And anyway, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. And that would be my greatest hope, in all honesty, that men would get something out of it and actually see it as something of an ally and to help you, and also to help you understand, how your female counterparts function in the world,
Of course, and that's one reason that we have such a diverse roster of guests on the show, is because I believe we can learn from each other. And if you ever make the mistake of getting so narrowly focused on your particular genre and your particular audience, I think there's a lot left on the table that we could learn from one another. So anyway, thank you for what you're doing.
Well, thank you.
But before we get into talking specifics about the book and your amazing writing career and all of that stuff, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Wow, good question. I don't think about that too often, actually, because I really got into writing because of my publishing career, and so I'm not one of those people who always wanted to be a writer ever since I was a little kid. I certainly have memories of being interested in writing at various points in my life, and probably the earliest was when I was in third grade. I had a best friend who was a poet. and she loved writing poetry and would write poetry all the time and basically roped me into it, but I enjoyed it. And we would write poems together, and I still have that little book of poems. It's quite cute, actually. And so that's my earliest memory of enjoying writing, but it truly wasn't until I was in my 30s that I started writing books and writing blog posts and starting to get an audience in any true.
Have you written any poetry since then?
Just love poems for select people.
I'll tell you what, a third grade poet, I think is the perfect summation of a true poet, because it's one of those things that I think you're either born with that skill set. Like a lot of things, I think you can work at poetry and get good at it, but a great poet, there's just something different about them because it looks so simple and it is so hard to do well.
I think that's right. And there's something about tapping into your essence and just observing your world. And I see how deep third graders are actually, that they're thinking about things and you kind of don't have to worry about the language. You just pour your heart out onto the page. And so it was a perfect time to explore poetry.
You mentioned your career in publishing. How did that come about?
I got into publishing sort of by accident, I like to say, because I went to school to study international affairs. That's what I got my undergrad degree in. And I got out and I just realized I didn't like that world. I had been in school in Washington, D.C. I was very disillusioned by politics. And so I came home to California and thought, well, what am I going to do? And it was my mom who just said, well, what do you like? And I said, books. And she said, well, there's work in books. You can try that out and see what's out there. And I followed a lead. We had a friend in book publishing, a family friend, and he gave me an informational interview and suggested that I just start sending out my resumes to places that weren't even hiring, which I did. And I got hired by one of those places that wasn't hiring, but was about to hire. And so I stumbled in that sense. But of course, once I landed in book publishing, it was a perfect fit. I loved it from the beginning and found it really challenging. And I've been working with books ever since.
When your mom asked you, what do you like? And your answer was books. Were there any particular authors or books or book series that had captured your imagination by that time? Who were some of your influences early on?
Well, so that was right after college. And during college, I had been taking a lot of classes and literature classes. So even though I was studying international affairs, I had taken this women writers class. And so I had read Virginia Woolf and Toni Morrison, and those two in particular had stood out as influences. And I think because of that class, I went on to feel that I should read all the classics that I could get my hands on. And so in college, I had read Anna Karenina and Don Quixote and Fountainhead. I mean, all these really big books for someone who was like 20 and 21 at the time. And that's where I was in my head. When you're young and trying to be an intellectual and reading all these giant classic books. And I came, out of college right around that time and just was mesmerized by that whole world. And so that's where that was coming from.
And just a sponge at that time where you're just soaking in as much as you can get your hands on.
Oh my goodness, 100%. And it's such a beautiful time because the world feels so open and amazing and you're learning so much and you're the opposite of disillusioned. You just start taking it all in. And I was traveling a lot, so I was reading Ernest Hemingway. I mean, it was a really rich time. And I just thought, yeah, I love books and I love writers. But the funny thing was I wasn't one of those people who was like, well, I should be a writer. I just thought, well, I love books. And so it turned out that book publishing was a perfect career.
Nice. So when you broke in because of the family friend, and what did you begin doing?
I got hired as an editorial assistant. I was basically half editorial and half customer service. My job was split 50%. And so the customer service part meant that I had to answer the phones. And funny enough, within 4 months, my ex-boss pulled me off that job. I think he thought I wasn't polite enough on the phone. but I was good enough to be an editor. I kind of cut to the chase. And so within 4 months, I was a full-time assistant editor, doing some editorial work. And he really groomed me. He helped me learn acquisitions. That was my first publishing job that I got in 2000. And I'm grateful for that job because it was a small publishing company that gave me an opportunity to have all aspects of the publishing world at my disposal. There was nothing that was off limits, as things usually are in small companies. You can try everything.
Wow. I've always wondered when a book lover, and you were definitely a lover of books and stories and authors, when you kind of pull back the curtain and see the publishing industry, as a business and not just this magical place where books show up and just dreams are made and magic happens behind the scenes, that I'm sure, I've not worked in publishing, but I'm sure that at some point it becomes a Monday thing, where you're like, oh, it's Monday, I have to go to work again. And, yes, I get to work with books, but, it's a job at some point. Does disillusionment ever come in working in publishing? And, does it ever feel like a job?
Yeah, of course it does. It has to some days, right? I was thinking when you were talking, like you get to see how the sausage is made. It's not always pretty, right? And yeah, it's the disillusion for me, luckily, has been kind of fueled my outrage at times. And what I mean by that is that I've been working first for a very small publisher, then for a women's publisher, and now my own press, which is a hybrid and non-traditional press. And in every single instance, all three of those companies, I felt like an underdog in some way. The small press because we weren't one of the big ones, the women's press because it was women authors and we were facing different kinds of barriers. And then with my own press as a non-traditional press, the same thing with the barriers to traditional publishing. And so that there has been days of disillusion, but it pokes at me in such a way that oftentimes it taps into, like I said, bits of outrage that even though I wouldn't recommend outrage as a way to come to work every day, it certainly isn't boring and it keeps me really passionate. And so even on the days that are kind of mundane and just going through the routine, I've always had this bigger sense of justice in mind, that all authors should get their due and that what really matters is the content of the books. And so, and honestly, every single time a new book comes out, I do feel something for that author, a sense of excitement. It's not the same as in the very beginning when everything felt like such a novelty, but I still do get that same sense of, oh my gosh, a new book is in the world.
Right. What drove you to, well, first off, it's 2019 now. We live in a world where there's a completely level playing field for men, women, and everyone involved. And that was said with as much sarcasm I could come up with and keep a straight face. First off, why do you feel like women are underrepresented in publishing, and what can we do about that?
It's a complicated topic because some might argue, well, women aren't underrepresented. There are so many women authors. And women read the majority of books, but it's a nuanced conversation because women, by and large, make up the publishing industry, but not the top tiers. The highest level CEOs and the decision makers are largely men, which mirrors a lot of industries, of course. And then in the publishing world at large, women are getting published. There's no question about it. And certainly they're publishing themselves in non-traditional spaces. The issue is about things like awards and who gets the accolades and what kinds of genres women feel encouraged to publish into. And this notion that I write about in my book that men's books are for everyone, but women's books are for women. And so that is the unlevel playing field that we're talking about. That is almost something that you can't see unless you start to pay attention to it. And of course, I've been in the position to be forced to pay attention to it because since 2004, I've been working in women-only publishing. And then, of course, the playing field is not level at all when it comes to the discrepancies between traditional publishing and non-traditional publishing, because there's an incentive for legacy publishers to keep these barriers to entry up and to be sitting in this ivory tower space saying, we're up here, we're the elite ones, and you guys down there who are paying for your own publishing journeys are not as good as us. So these divides are in place for reasons, and I'm trying to expose them and shine light on them to give people just a perspective more than anything else.
Mentioning that divide with the rise of indie publishing, especially the, last 5, 6, 7 years, when the advent of the Kindle came along, it really uprooted and upended the way we thought about publishing. And, before that, there was the attitude that self-publishing meant lower quality work, meant that you had to pay for everything, and the whole vanity press attitude, and that sort of thing. Well, we've seen these attitudes start to shift, and we see some very top tier authors who have used the traditional publishing machinery to gain an audience, then start adopting some of the principles of indie publishing. And, I don't have to go through this publisher. I can go directly to my audience. And there's arguments there about, well, would you have had that audience if you hadn't had the platform to begin with, and all of that. And I have lots of friends and associates who have very successful indie publishing careers that they've completely built by themselves. And, they target a genre and a subgenre that's very hungry, and they, have figured out how to connect with their audience. And God love them all. I think everyone's publishing journey is amazing, and we applaud anyone who can get their words out to their audience. But you focus on a hybrid method with your company, She Writes Press and SparkPoint. How do you feel about where publishing is? And what is it that you guys do to help shepherd authors and to get them to the best place they can be?
Yeah, all of the things that you said are, of course, true, that the publishing industry is just in the middle of, both a really exciting time and also upheaval. And part of it is due to the fact that anyone can publish. But of course, the most important thing for me as an author advocate is that people publish well. I like to say that I'm publishing agnostic in the sense that I don't care and celebrate any author who wants to self-publish or hybrid publish or traditionally publish. But if you're not doing it well, or if you're not looking out for yourself in some ways, even with the big guys, even with traditional publishing, then you're doing yourself a disservice, because just because they're whoever, doesn't mean they're going to produce a perfect book, or that you don't have to watch out for your own interests. And so it's a time where authors need to go into any kind of endeavor with their eyes wide open. And what hybrid publishing is, and the reason it's called hybrid is because it's not traditional and it's not self-publishing either. So we do shepherd books. It's the perfect way to describe it, through a process that looks, in my mind, almost exactly like traditional publishing, except that the author pays, the author subsidizes, and then in return for that, they get a much higher percentage of their royalties. And then what's important for us, and another thing that makes us hybrid, is that we vet the submissions and we have traditional distribution. And so this whole idea of leveling the playing field, which is really important to me in my career, is about giving authors access. So what traditional publishing does is gives authors access, right, to bookstores and libraries, and for books to be able to be sold wherever books are sold. And what that is distribution. It's effective distribution, which self-publishing lacks. Right. So there's just this interesting space going on, and we're solidly there trying to carve out hybrid publishing and what it is and legitimizing it. And so now, 7 years into this venture, we've certainly made a lot of strides, but we're not all the way there.
Well, and you guys focus primarily on women, right?
The imprint She Writes Press is women only, and then the other imprint, which is called SparkPress, is men and women. So we do, I mean, I primarily work with women. I would say 90% of the authors or more than that are women, just because of the breakdown of the list. And so we have a little smattering of men every season that are publishing on SparkPress.
Gotcha. You have written a few books yourself, including the new one, Right On, Sisters. But what was the first one that you published, and what was the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, my first book was called What's Your Book? And the inspiration was pretty entrepreneurial in a sense, if I think about it, because I left my job in traditional publishing. It was 2012. And I thought to myself, I'm about to go into this whole new venture. I'm going to be coaching authors. I'm going to become a publisher. I was jumping, like with these parachutes from a W-2 kind of job into a totally freelance new space. And one of the things I know about book publishing is that having a platform helps your business. And the best way to have a platform is to publish a book. I mean, these were the exact principles I was telling my authors that I was working with. And so I decided to become an author. I thought I needed to do that to walk my talk. And so that's how that book came about. And it's short and simple and lays out some pretty basic principles about writing and publishing. And it's like from idea to publication. And it was a great experience. And I published it on She Writes Press. It was the first book that we published.
Talking about author platforms, that is something that is crucial in today's market, and something that everybody talks about. Something that was not, I won't say not as important 10 years ago, but it meant something different 10 years ago. What sorts of things should authors be working on to build a platform?
Great question, because author platform is really big and inclusive of a lot of things, and people tend to believe that it's only about social media or fame, and it's not. It's so much bigger than that. And so author platform can be things like getting your articles posted, or guest blogging, or being a guest on someone's show like we're doing today, showing up on a podcast, anything that you have expertise in or that you can teach about. People don't realize that they can do YouTube videos or just things on their own to create their own channels or to start a podcast. It's not to say that any of these things comes without a lot of time and energy attached to them, right? But that's part of building a platform. And so I think fewer people are blogging than used to blog. Right now, podcasting seems to be the new rage. But whatever the thing is that someone is drawn to, certainly publishing, and I think self-publishing is a perfect way to build an author platform. And I talk about it as a catch-22, actually, because you have to have a platform to get a traditional book deal. And yet you can't really have a platform without a book. And so it's a complicated world out there. And I think authors start to bang their heads against the wall, being like, well, how am I going to build an author platform? And certainly one of the best ways to build it is content, but it's not only book content. It's any kind of content you can imagine.
Well, and there are a few people that break through just on the talent of their writing each year, but that's getting smaller and smaller. And that's those things don't matter as much anymore. Or I can't say that, but I had a point I was going with. People wind up. If you are one of those people where, just the luck of the draw, someone wound up with your manuscript off of a slush pile, or they met you at a convention, or however, a lot of those people wind up signing really bad deals because they don't have that platform, and the publisher feels like they're taking a bigger risk on this author.
Yeah, and you're right about these darling authors that break out every year, and they deserve it. Lots of times their writing is really beautiful and brilliant and goes to auction, but they don't come out of nowhere. Usually they have been handpicked from really prestigious writing programs, or they've been toiling away in the background for years. I mean, I recently interviewed someone on my own podcast R.O. Kwan, and she has a what quote unquote breakout novel. However, when we started to interview her, we found out that she had been toiling behind the scenes for years. You know, she had been working on this book for years, but she had published in all kinds of ways, and she had networked with the writing community, and she was really well established, even though this was a debut novel. And so yes, there are those stories that someone gets plucked out of nowhere, and those are the stories that you hear about, but they're so few and far between. And so, and also author platform does matter more to nonfiction writers than it does to fiction writers, but there are still things that fiction writers can do to begin to build an audience that are creative and innovative.
Every overnight success that I have interviewed is usually a decade in the making, and
right.
you don't see all the other stuff behind it. Let's talk about your new book, Write On, Sisters, WRITE. Voice, Courage, and Claiming Your Place at the Table. You have published a number of books before that, breaking ground on your memoir, Greenlight your book, How to Sell Your Memoir, What's Your Book. This one seems to be a little different in tone than your previous books, where the previous ones tended to focus kind of on the nuts and bolts of publishing, if you will, and this one seems to come from a more personal place. That's how I see it. Mm-hmm. There's a great line toward the beginning of the book where you call publishing this brilliant and brave act of intimacy. But first off, what was the purpose of this book, and are you coming from a different place with this book?
Yes. Yes to the second question. In terms of the reason to write this book was because it has been a long time in the making. I've said to a couple other people that I felt I had to earn the right to write this book, because I have been working in women's publishing for a long time, and I've been seeing a lot of things that I think are unique to women writers, but I don't think I had the maturity, I guess is the right word, or maybe the life experience to be able to articulate it until I was really good and ready. And so I've been thinking about this book for at least the last 10 years, actively wanting to write it for the past 3 or 4 years. And then because it is, some of the assertions that I'm making certainly come from my life experience, and the best argument that I felt I could make for the things I was saying was to say, look, I've lived this, I've experienced this, I've worked with women who are experiencing these kinds of things and suffering, certain kinds of challenges every single day. And so I do share a lot of personal story in there about myself and my experience. And so, yeah, it is more intimate. And I also felt I should risk more on the page and be brave. I teach memoir, and so I thought it would be more powerful. And again, this idea of walking my talk, right? If I'm going to say, look, it's brave and it's intimate, and I'm telling memoirists to bare their souls on the page, I thought I had to risk, and I do share some stories in there that felt a little scary to share.
You really challenge writers to go all in making that emotional connection and not hiding things because we're scared that it might not be marketable if we really tell the truth. Bob Dylan told us in the 60s that all we need is 3 chords and the truth, but for us writers we need a couple of 100 pages and the truth. But do you feel like this disparity in publishing is causing women to, and men, but we're focusing on women here. Do you feel like it's causing people to hold back and not get to the real bitter truth of it all?
I don't think so. I don't think it is. I think I say in the book at some point, women are doing it anyway. It's just that these things are in the way. And sometimes they really do scare the shit out of people. Sometimes I talk about it as conditioning. You're not crazy if you feel this way. These kinds of challenges, the challenges that I write about in the book, which are historical, social, financial, and psychological, they're real. And I'm not trying to say women aren't getting their due because this system is set up against them. I'm saying women struggle because of it. And that's it. And so the struggle is real. And what I hope is that the book will help women see these realities, including the ways in which they get in their own way, including the ways in which they sabotage themselves, so that they can begin to say, I don't want to do this anymore. And so that's really the point of the book more than anything. And absolutely, I'm working with incredibly brave women and men, but primarily because I work with so many women. No matter what, telling your story in the most truthful way possible is an act of courage. And that, I think that includes novelists. It's super scary to expose yourself. And sometimes that's just about the craft of writing, and sometimes it's about your personal story. And I do want people to see, look, there are real challenges and barriers that get in the way of us doing this. And so the fact that you do it means that you are completely kick-ass.
Why is voice so important for a writer to find and to nail for themselves? And are there mistakes that people make in finding their voice? Or I guess what I'm asking is, do people settle for something before they finally find their voice? And how do you know when you found your thing, the thing that makes you so unique in the space?
Yeah, I mean, voice, and it's why it's in the subtitle of my book. I've always thought of it as this very elusive thing that writers feel that they have to find. And if you go to writing classes, especially in college writing classes, they're talking about finding your voice, and that somehow you have to be educated in order to spend so many years toiling away until you finally arrive. And I have been struggling with that notion for a really long time, because I've always felt that people's voice is very natural. I mean, not to say like you have it or you don't, but it is this sort of freedom just to be you. And so I was working, doing a webinar with Dani Shapiro, who is a really wonderful novelist and memoirist. And I asked her, what is voice? And her response was one word: courage. And I was like, yeah, duh, that's it. It's courage just to be yourself, which was kind of what I was saying, just not as succinctly. And so what I think happens is that people, again, this idea of getting in your own way, I see this a lot with academics, with therapists, certain kinds of people who have learned how to write in a certain way and just don't trust their own way of articulating. Like if you're in a conversation, how you and I feel very comfortable articulating ourselves and self-expressing, it should feel that easy on the page. It should feel that you have this capacity to lay down your voice and who you are, and that should shine through. And so the best writers, the reason we love them is because it's almost, you can hear them in your head. And that is really what you're looking for. If you're looking for anything, is honestly just authenticity.
There are a few genres that women tend to dominate in, and romance is one. Also, psychological thrillers are becoming some of the best books in that genre have been by women for the last few years, really. And women are really staking a claim there. What can women do to bring their stories to other genres? Like science fiction, for instance, is heavily male dominated. And we could go on and on and on, military thrillers, whatever. There are, we all as people have varied interest, and I think there are probably some fantastic stories out there that just get overlooked because they don't feel like they fit in there. So, whatever the genre, what can women do if they have an interest in that to start making inroads there?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is not to get discouraged. I talk about this in the book, actually, about genres and how women are, and I say not encouraged rather than discouraged. There are certain genres in which women are not encouraged to write and men are. And so I think what happens is that women oftentimes get marginalized into genres that they feel more comfortable in. Sometimes not being encouraged means that you get sidelined into other spaces that other people are more comfortable in and that you therefore are more comfortable in. And so it's paying attention to that and saying, look, if you want to do a genre that is more male dominated, watch out for those moments of not being encouraged, which can turn into active discouragement moments. But I know women who have left certain genres because they have just felt like they're banging their heads against the wall and like they're not going to make it. And then they and this happens in journalism as well, right? Where that's maybe a more easy thing for people to wrap their minds around, where women don't get certain beats because they're seen as heavier hitting, or male dominated or dangerous for that matter. And so that can be translated into book publishing. It's just a little bit more nuanced. So I think those women who feel compelled and drawn to those genres have to work at it. And also I would say not to abandon it. And you almost have to become an activist if you are in these genres. And you do see that with women like Ursula Le Guin or Margaret Atwood. They have become real activists for women who want to be in these genres because they themselves have experienced these moments of being not encouraged.
There's a chapter in the new book called Sisterhoods, and you open with when you guys first launched She Writes Press, and there was a kind of a slogan or a statement that was going around, and your co-founder, I think it was, if I'm remembering right, it said, "Friends don't let friends write alone," and you kind of modified that a little bit to "Writers don't let writers write alone," because you can find community with people that you don't necessarily have this other bond with. And please correct me if I just murdered that whole passage. But how important is community and finding like-minded people that can challenge and encourage, as opposed to this idea that a lot of us have of the writer being, a very lonely person who works and toils in in obscurity and silence for most of their lives. How does community come into that?
I just think it helps, and you remembered it perfectly, and I did modify it to be that writers don't let writers write alone, because I see firsthand, myself included, how helpful it is to write in community. And sometimes it's just knowing that other people are out there. And so people may be familiar with NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. Grant Faulkner, who's the co-host of my podcast, is the executive director over there at NaNoWriMo. And what that is just that every November, tens and thousands of people participate in National Novel Writing Month. And I wrote a lot of my own book, this book, Write On Sisters, in November. And because it just helped knowing that all these people were doing it and checking in on social media and sharing their word count goals. And that is an example of community. It doesn't mean that you have to have a writing buddy, although that could be helpful, or a writing coach, or that you have to show up at a cafe and write facing someone else. It's really just about not doing this thing in obscurity or completely alone. And then a lot of writers that I know don't have support, like real support for what they're doing. People are like, oh, it's a hobby, or why are you bothering, or are you still working on that thing? These are messages that writers hear all the time. And so finding people that get it, that's your community. These people who are like, oh yeah, I understand why you're spending hours and hours and hours on this every single month for something that may not pay off ever. And I think that means a lot, so that you're not just sitting there feeling like you are the sole crazy person that who's putting all your time and energy and oftentimes money into this endeavor.
Well, the new book is called Write On Sisters, Voice, Courage, and Claiming Your Place at the Table. Brooke, what a fantastic book. And I think this is going to be a really important resource for writers of all stripes, but women especially. And thank you for doing what you're doing. If people are just learning about you and all that you do, is there a place where they can connect with you online and find out more about you and follow along for news coming up?
Yes, thank you so much, Hank. I have a website, brookewarner.com, and I am widely easy to find on social media. And I think my website is the best place to find out about all the things I do, including my presses and my memoir stuff and my coaching.
Perfect. We're going to send everyone to see you and to pick up their copy of the new book. Brooke, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Oh, thanks again.
Stay tuned now for an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
I'm melting! I'm melting! Cried Joey. Take the picture already! He stood with one arm around the bronze waist of the bewitched tribute statue, Samantha Stevens, riding a broom across a crescent moon. Jason tried in vain to frame the shot without any tourists in it, but that was impossible. From all points of the compass, a merry horde had arrived for Salem's 2-day summer psychic fair. All the commuter trains had burst open, like cornucopias filled beyond capacity, spilling endless fruits and nuts onto the red brick sidewalks of Essex Street. A vampiress in lavender shorts and feathered boots sold maple chocolate walnut fudge in front of the Witch City tattoo parlor. A near-naked gypsy in purple-green veils danced with a pheasant in her arms around a plug-in Hanukkah menorah. A fat man in a fetching blue jeans dress sold amethyst and citrine charm bracelets in front of Medusa Cafe, but his stand got knocked over by a one-armed crone driving a mobility scooter who sang "Choo-choo" as she passed, her stump on the wheel, her lipstick ghastly, her gnarled right hand raised in trailing plumes of noxious cigarette smoke. Chewbacca leapt out of her way and slapped sparks from his fur. He gave a disgruntled growl before going back to playing Summer Lovin' on his ukulele. The old one-armed dervish drove off, "Choo-choo!" parting a crowd of wanderers, slack-jawed tourists with camera straps tight across their bellies, yellow-vested police on segways, elderly rollerbladers, face-painted infants and harried parents, and college girls. So many hot, hysterical college girls that you'd think somebody had napalmed a sorority house. "Jason, are you deaf?" "Sorry." Jason raised the phone and took the shot. Joey inspected the photo and nodded in approval. "Your turn." "No, thanks." "Do it, Shaggy. Don't make me hex you." Jason gave in and traded places. He put an arm around Samantha's metal back. Her bronze body had flushed in the afternoon sun, warm through his glove, but her eyes were weary. No, downright creepy. And her smile was forced, like a Disneyland princess who'd had her toe stomped. "Say chowder," cried Joey, who'd been practicing his New England accent all morning. "Come on, man. Say chowder." "Fine, chowder." Joey got the shot, and Jason surrendered Samantha to a chubby kid wearing a Gandalf beard who climbed up to worship her bronze bosom.